Imagine this. Night, searchlights cutting through the darkness, and the cries of children echoing in your ears. It was like this, on a floodlit runway of a provincial airport, that Sara's world collapsed. The harsh hands of guards tore her away from her own children. The plan had failed. Ahead lay only uncertainty. The blare of sirens was deafening. The cold night air pierced her to the bone. Sara remembered the smell of kerosene, mixed with sweat and despair. It felt like the bitterest scent in the world. She saw her small daughter, Emily, clinging to a guard's trousers, sobbing. Her son, Thomas, tried to reach for his father, John, but he was already being dragged towards another car. "John!" Sara cried out, but her voice was swallowed by the roar of engines and shouts. Her throat was raw. He didn't even turn around. His head was bowed, broken, already. Her hands were twisted behind her back, rough ropes digging into her skin. Her eyes frantically searched for her children. Their silhouettes, small and defenseless, disappeared into the darkness beneath the bright searchlights. "No!" Another cry escaped, more like a gasp. The guard, a burly man with a mustache, paid her no mind. He simply pushed her forward towards a black van. Every movement was sharp and merciless. Sara stumbled, but he didn't let her fall, just yanked her harder. Inside the van, several people were already seated. Their faces were unfamiliar, as frightened and dirty as her own. Sara saw John. He sat hunched over, staring at the floor. His eyes were empty. He didn't even look up. "The children," Sara whispered. Her heart ached with pain. She imagined them crying now in some cold, unfamiliar place. How scared they must be. "Shut up, woman," the guard standing by the van door barked. His voice was raspy and rough. "Another word, and you'll sleep standing up." Sara turned away. Tears streamed down her cheeks, mixing with dirt and sweat. Her dreams of a new life, of freedom from poverty and constant fear, had crumbled. They should have been in the sky by now, far from here, heading towards the promise of a better future. Just a few hours ago, she had still believed. Believed in John, in his crazy but tempting plan. He had promised that everything would be different, that the children would live like people, not just survive. "Everything will be fine, Sara," he told her the night before, stroking her hair. "Just a little longer. This is our only chance." His eyes burned with a feverish glint, which she had then mistaken for determination. Now she understood it was fear. She remembered how they had crept onto the airfield under the cover of darkness. Every step was filled with adrenaline. The children, wrapped in blankets, slept in their arms. Sara held Thomas. John held Emily. They walked across the grass, trying not to make a sound. And then, the plane. A small, private jet that, according to their plan, should have been empty. John had studied schematics, preparing for months. He was sure he could get into the cockpit while the pilots were changing shifts. But something went wrong. Someone noticed them, or was waiting. Searchlights flashed like a sunstroke, tearing them from the shadows. Sirens wailed, cutting through the night's silence. Sara instinctively pulled Thomas closer, trying to shield him from the sudden brightness and noise. John panicked. He dropped Emily to the ground, grabbed Sara's hand, and pulled her, shouting, "Run! Run!" But there was nowhere to run. They were surrounded in seconds. Dozens of armed men in uniform emerged from the darkness. She saw John try to fight back, but he was immediately subdued. He wasn't a fighter, never had been. His despair was contagious, and now she felt it seep into every cell of her body. Now, In the cramped, foul-smelling van, Sara felt a wave of nausea wash over her. She looked at John. His cheek was swollen, and blood was caked on his lip. He looked old, broken. She wanted to scream at him, to ask why he had been so sure, why he had dragged them into this. But the words caught in her throat. What would it change? Nothing. The van braked sharply, throwing Sara forward. The iron doors swung open, and light hit her eyes. They had arrived. The place looked like an old, dilapidated police station, but with bars on the windows. They were pulled out one by one, like sacks of garbage. John came out first, escorted by another guard. He shuffled his feet, not lifting his head. Sara tried to call out to him, but her voice trembled. "Where are the children, John? What about them?" she asked. Her words hung in the air. He walked past her like a ghost. Maybe he didn't even hear her, or didn't want to. The guard leading Sara yanked her arm. Come on, don't hold us up." He pushed her through a narrow corridor where the walls were painted a sickly pale green. The smell of disinfectant and something stale stung her nostrils. She was led into a small room, a table, 2 chairs, and a man in uniform. He didn't introduce himself, just pointed to a chair. "Name?" he asked, his voice indifferent. "Sara," she replied, her lips barely moving. "Full name," he insisted. He looked at her as if she were just a stain on the wall. She gave her full name, then, unable to hold back, blurted out, "My children. Where are they? What about them?" The man looked up at her. There was nothing in his eyes but weariness and indifference. "Not your concern. They'll be taken care of." Taken care of? Sara felt a surge of fury. "I'm their mother. I have a right to know." "You're not a mother now. You're a criminal." He cut her off. His words were like a slap. "Sign the report. Then we'll talk." He slid papers towards her. Her hand trembled. She tried to read what was written, but the letters blurred before her eyes. All she saw were accusations: plane hijacking, attempted illegal border crossing, using children for criminal purposes. The last phrase pierced her. Using children? But she had done it for them, for their future. "I can't," Sara said, pushing the papers away. "I can't sign this." The man sighed. It was a heavy, irritated sigh. He pushed the papers back. "If you don't sign now, you'll sign later. You'll sign eventually." She felt hope, the last tiny spark, dying in her chest. The children. John. They had been separated. Her world, which had barely hung by a thread, crumbled to dust. "Where's my husband?" she asked. "Where he belongs," the guard replied, "and you'll be there soon enough." Sara was lifted again, led down the corridors. The sound of her footsteps echoed in the silence. Each step took her further from her children, further from John, further from everything she knew. A door with a massive bolt opened. Beyond it was darkness, dampness, and a stale smell. It was a cell, cold, empty, alien. The walls were covered with names and dates, scratched in with fingernails or something sharp. Someone's whisper drifted from above, from an adjacent cell. She heard the clang of metal as the door slammed shut behind her. Complete darkness, complete solitude. And in that darkness, she was left alone with her thoughts. What now? Where were her children? Were they alive? That was the only question pulsing in her head. And there was no answer. Only chilling uncertainty. In the complete darkness of the cell, Sara felt nothing but the cold and dampness seeping into her bones. The stale air pressed on her chest. She could hear her own heart beating, drowning out distant moans and rustles from neighboring cells. Her world had shrunk to this tiny, foul-smelling space. She was alone with her thoughts, and those thoughts were monstrous. The children. John. What about them? This question pulsed in her temples, giving her no peace. It seemed like an eternity passed before something scraped at the iron door. The sharp clang of a bolt. The blinding light of an incandescent bulb hit her eyes. "Out!" an unfamiliar voice barked. Sara was led into the corridor, then to a shower room, where she was given a piece of laundry soap and cold water. She hastily rinsed her face, trying to wash away the dirt and tears, but the pain remained. Then she was led further, to another cell. The door swung open, and she saw. It wasn't an empty cell. It was overflowing. A dozen women sat or lay on bunk beds, barely fitting. The smell of sweat, unwashed bodies, and something sour hit her nose. The women's eyes, cloudy and tired, stared at her. The newcomer. Sara felt naked under their gaze. "Come in. Don't just stand there," one of them grumbled, an older woman with sharp features and dull, perceptive eyes. This was Lena. She sat on the bottom bunk, cleaning a fingernail with a scrap of paper. Sara hesitantly stepped over the threshold. She was pointed to an empty spot on the top bunk, right by the wall. She climbed up, trying not to look at anyone, but feeling every cell of her body resist this place. She pressed herself against the cold wall, curled into a ball. Water dripped from above. Or was it condensation? She didn't care. All she wanted was to disappear. "What, new one?" Lena asked, her voice low and raspy. "What are you in for?" Sara didn't answer. She didn't want to talk. Didn't want to tell these strange, rough women her story. She just shook her head, turning to face the wall. "Suit yourself," Lena snorted. "But they'll find out anyway, or they'll make something up. Go to sleep while you can." Sara tried to sleep, but the noise, smells, and anxiety kept her awake. All night she heard the creak of bunks, moans in sleep, quiet conversations. Her thoughts crowded her mind. Emily, Thomas, John. Where were they? Morning brought a new shock. The guard's rough voice, the clang of metal, light hitting her eyes. Breakfast, gray, watery porridge. Sara couldn't swallow a single spoonful. "Eat," Lena ordered, handing Sara her aluminum mug. "Otherwise you'll starve. This isn't a sanatorium." Sara took the mug but still didn't touch the food. Inside, everything tightened with fear and disgust. How would she survive here? How would her children survive? "Hey, you!" Sara called out to the guard as he passed the cell. "My children! What about them? Just tell me something." The guard, a young man with acne, merely gave her a quick, indifferent glance. "Not allowed. You'll find out in due time." And he walked on. That, in due time, was worse than any torture. The uncertainty ate at her from within. She felt like she was losing her mind. For several days, Sara lived in a fog. Food tasted bland, water bitter. She constantly tried to catch the guards' eyes, begging them for any information. One day, during yard time, she managed to approach a guard named Petrov. He was a large man with tired eyes, who sometimes answered questions if they weren't too bold. Sara had seen him occasionally step aside and speak softly on the phone, his face softening, probably with his mother. "Officer Petrov," Sara tried to keep her voice calm, not too desperate. "My children, I'm a mother of 2. I just want to know where they are. What happened to them?" Petrov stopped, looking at her with a long gaze. Something akin to sympathy flickered in his eyes, but then quickly vanished. He exhaled cigarette smoke, which smelled of cheap tobacco. "Your children were taken," he said in a dull voice, "as required, to an orphanage. They'll be better off there than with you. With you, they're now criminals. Petrov's words hit Sara like a hammer blow. An orphanage. So they weren't killed, not abandoned. It was both a relief and a new blow. She imagined them there, small, alone, in a strange, cold place. "And my husband John?" she barely managed to utter. Petrov shook his head. "He's also in custody, but not here. He was sent further away. I can't tell you anything more." He turned and walked away, leaving Sara standing in the middle of the gray yard, where other prisoners walked in circles, like automatons. Her heart ached with pain. Children in an orphanage. John somewhere far away. She was alone. In the cell, Lena seemed to see and hear everything. She approached Sara, who was sitting, staring blankly at the wall. "Why are you sitting there?" Lena asked. "Do you think they'll tell you the truth? They don't care. They just want you not to cry and not to cause trouble." Sara remained silent. Tears welled up in her throat, but she swallowed them. Not here, not in front of them. So, an orphanage, Sara whispered to herself. She needed to do something to reach them. At least find out. At least send a letter. The internal hierarchy of the cell quickly became apparent. Lena was the unofficial leader. She didn't seek power, but her word carried weight. She knew how to get an extra portion of hot water or a piece of bread. She knew when to keep silent and when to snap back. One day, when it was Sara's turn to clean the floor, another inmate, a young and nervous woman named Betty, accidentally spilled dirty water. Lena pounced on her. "Are you completely stupid?" Lena barked. "Now she has to clean up after you? Fix your own mistakes." Betty stammered, trying to apologize. Sara watched them, understanding that here it was every woman for herself, and she would have to be the same, for her children. Every day, Sara fought despair. She tried to write letters to her children, but they were immediately rejected, citing non-compliance with form. She requested a meeting with a lawyer. "Your lawyer, Mr. Davis, came," a guard once tossed at her. "But you were being interrogated. They said he was busy." Sara knew it was a lie. She hadn't been interrogated. They simply didn't want her to communicate with anyone. A few days later, she was finally called to see her lawyer. Mr. Davis sat at the table in the same small room where she had been interrogated. He smelled of cheap coffee and stale tobacco. He constantly adjusted his ill-fitting tie. "Sara," Mr. Davis began without looking up from his papers, "your case. It's complicated. The charges are serious." "My children, Mr. Davis." Sara leaned forward. "What about them? Are they in an orphanage? Can I send them a letter? Find out how they are?" The lawyer slowly raised his head. His eyes were tired, swollen. "The children? Yes, they're in a state orphanage. I checked. You can try to send a letter, but there are no guarantees." "And John, my husband?" Sara's voice trembled. "Your husband has been detained, held in a different pretrial detention center. His case is being investigated separately. I cannot give you access to his materials until you sign the reports." "I won't sign anything until I know about my children," Sara almost screamed. Her hands trembled. Mr. Davis sighed. It was a familiar, heavy sigh. "Listen, Sara. Right now, the main thing is you. Understand? You need to think about yourself, about your sentence. The children will be better off if you get out sooner." "I can't just think about myself." Her eyes filled with tears. "They're my children. I tried to give them a better life, and now they're there, alone." The lawyer shook his head. "Your motives. In court, This will be interpreted as an attempt to use children for criminal purposes. That's an aggravating circumstance. Sara looked at him, trying to understand. He wasn't evil. He was just a tired man doing his job, without emotion. "Is there any hope?" Sara asked, feeling her last strength leaving her. Mr. Davis adjusted his tie. "There's always hope, but you have a long road ahead, a very long one." He put the papers aside. "You need to prepare for court. It will be soon." These words sounded like a verdict. Court. A long road. No guarantees. Sara understood that her desperate attempt to save her children had turned into an even greater tragedy for them, and for her too. Back in the cell, Sara felt empty. Lena watched her. "So the lawyer?" she asked. "Did he promise you the moon?" "No," Sara replied, her voice hoarse. "He said there would be a trial, soon." Lena snorted. "Well, get ready. They don't forgive here, and they don't wait. You're on your own." She bent over her faded photograph again, which Sara had only glimpsed. It seemed to be a small girl. Lena quickly hid it, noticing Sara's gaze. Sara lay on her bunk, listening to the creak of the beds. Court. She had to be strong. For Emily. For Thomas. She had to find out what was happening to them and how to help them. Even if it cost her everything. Even if it cost her herself. Soon, a summons arrived. A simple, official paper. A date was marked on it. Tomorrow. Tomorrow would be the trial. Tomorrow, her fate would be decided. And possibly, the fate of her children. Sara's heart froze. Her legs gave way. She knew it wouldn't just be a trial, but a verdict. The next morning, when they came for Sara, she no longer felt fear. There was only a deafening emptiness. Her legs gave way, but she forced herself to stand. A tremor. Not from cold, from inevitability. She was led out of the cell, down long gray corridors. Each step echoed in her head. She saw other prisoners, their faces just as gaunt. They were all part of one large, faceless mass. Then came the van. The same one, or very similar. The smell of metal, vomit, and fear. Sara was shaken on the bumpy road. She looked out of a tiny, dirty window, from which only glimpses of gray sky were visible. Finally, they arrived. The courthouse looked imposing, but for Sara, it was just another stage of her downfall. She was led inside, through a side entrance, avoiding curious glances. The courtroom was quiet. A few people in the gallery, dull eyes. She saw Mr. Davis. He sat at the defense table, adjusting his perpetually slipping tie. He smelled again of coffee and stale tobacco. He raised a tired gaze to Sara, nodding briefly. Support? Or just an acknowledgement of doom? Sara didn't know. She was seated next to him. A hard, cold chair. Her gaze darted to the prosecution bench. There, hunched over, sat John. His shoulders were slumped, his head bowed. He looked like a shadow. Sara's heart clenched. He was broken. His appearance was terrible. Not a single word, not a single glance in her direction. He seemed not to see her, not to hear her. He was just there, like furniture. The judge, an elderly man with a stern face, began the proceedings. Words merged into an indistinguishable hum. The prosecutor spoke of criminal conspiracy, threat to national security, use of minors. Sara listened, but understood nothing. It felt as if they weren't talking about her, not about her life. She only saw Emily and Thomas, their small hands, their laughter. How could this be called use? Mr. Davis tried to object. His voice sounded weak and tired. He spoke of dire circumstances, desperation, lack of means. But his words shattered against the deaf wall of accusations. Your clients, Sara and John Smith, knowingly committed a grave crime, the prosecutor declared, his voice ringing out. Their actions posed a threat to the lives of passengers and crew. Sara wanted to shout that they meant no harm to anyone, that they just wanted to escape, to give their children a chance. But the words caught in her throat. She just looked at John. He didn't stir. The judge picked up a folder. His voice was dry, emotionless. The court, having considered all presented evidence, finds Sara Smith guilty on all counts. Then the sentence, numbers, a term, long, agonizing, 10 years, 10 long years. The words buzzed in Sara's ears like a swarm of wasps. 10 years, an eternity. She turned to John. His sentence was also announced. 15 years. His broken figure seemed even smaller. He didn't even flinch. He just sat, staring at the floor. Sara was lifted. The convoy took her by the arms. Mr. Davis was saying something, but she didn't hear him. She just looked at John one last time. He still hadn't lifted his head. The children, was all Sara managed to think as she was led out of the courtroom. 10 years. That meant she wouldn't see them until they grew up. They would forget her. This thought was worse than any sentence. She was shoved back into the van. Now she was not just a suspect, but a convict, a criminal. This was a brand. It would be with her forever. The road to the women's correctional facility seemed endless. The van was packed with women. Their faces were grim, their gazes extinguished. Some looked at Sara with curiosity, others with indifference. Sara heard snippets of conversations about who was in for what, about rations, about packages, about children left behind. These stories were similar to her own, but without the plain. Just despair. One of the women, with a rose tattoo on her neck, asked her, "Well, fresh meat? What did you get locked up for?" Sara just shook her head. She had no strength to speak. She didn't want to share her pain with these strangers. "All right, suit yourself," the woman replied, turning away. "It'll all come out eventually anyway." When the van stopped, the air inside the compartment was thick with tension. The iron doors swung open, and they were let out. Before them were high walls, topped with barbed wire, gray buildings, sparse, stunted trees. This was the colony, her new home for the next 10 years. They were led to the reception area. Another search. Another humiliating procedure. All their clothes were removed, every inch of their bodies inspected. Sara felt as if her skin was being peeled off. She was given a new uniform, rough fabric, baggy, shapeless, uncomfortable boots, everything gray, dismal, just like her future. Then, registration. A woman in uniform, with a tired face and a sharp voice, recorded her details. "Name, charge, sentence," she said monotonously. "Any children?" Sara flinched. "Yes, Emily and Thomas." "Noted," the warden said. "Your children have been placed in a state orphanage. By court order, contact is restricted. All questions through your lawyer." "And John?" Sara asked, her voice barely audible. The warden looked up. "Your husband, John Smith, has been transferred to a maximum security correctional facility. Communication is impossible. You are separated." The words were like a punch to the gut. State orphanage. Maximum security facility. This was the end. Everything that had been, everything she had strived for, all had collapsed. Sara felt something tear inside her. The children. John. They had been torn apart, like an old newspaper, and now she had to live with it. She was led to the block. Long corridors, rows of identical doors. Behind each, its own story, its own pain. The smells were even sharper than in the pre-trial detention center. Chlorine, sour food, staleness, unwashed linen. Finally, the door opened. This was her new cell. Several women were already inside. There was a bunk bed, a dirty table in the middle. And Lena. She sat on the bottom bunk, cleaning a fingernail with a scrap of paper. Lena looked up as Sara entered. Her gaze swept over Sara, her new uniform, her devastated face. There was no sympathy or schadenfreude in her eyes, only cold observation. "Oh, new one," Lena said, her voice still low and raspy. "So, Sara, the trial's over. Did you get your sentence?" Sara remained silent. She just nodded, trying to gather her remaining strength. A storm raged inside her. Despair, anger, and a tiny, stubborn spark. She wouldn't give up for her children. "Well, come in," Lena said, pointing to the top bunk. "It's free there, and don't stand like a statue. This isn't a hotel, and if you whine, you won't see the spot by the window." Sara climbed onto the bunk, tired, devastated. She looked at Lena, who had bent over her scrap of paper again. Lena was right. This isn't a sanatorium. And to survive, to do anything for her children, she needed to become like her. Tough, callous, fighting. Otherwise, they would devour her, or she would devour herself. The first days blurred into a gray, faceless succession of awakenings, tasteless food, and heavy thoughts. Each day began with the clang of the iron door and the guard's shout, "Wake up!" Sara struggled to lower her legs from the top bunk, feeling every muscle ache. Then came the queue for the toilet, where there was never enough water, and breakfast, watery porridge that smelled of fish. Sara choked it down, but forced herself to eat. She knew that without strength, she would be able to do nothing. The cell was noisy and cramped. 7 women, 7 different stories, 7 frayed nerves. There was Betty, a young girl who constantly cried, remembering her boyfriend. There was Martha, a large, silent woman who was in for a fight and always wore rosary beads around her neck. And Lena, whose presence was felt most heavily of all. Lena had been here a long time. The guards knew her. Other women obeyed her. She didn't shout or command, but her words were always final. Her gaze, as if understanding everything, pierced Sara through and through. Sara tried to adapt. She learned to get up quickly in the mornings to wash. Learned to silently accept her portion of food, asking no questions. Learned to ignore the smells and sounds that used to make her nauseous. But inside, the pain for her children still burned. "Every time I eat this slop, I think of them." Sara's mind raced. What are they eating? Who is feeding them? Is their bed cold? These thoughts were like a knife to her heart. They made her hold on. In the cell, there was one spot where a rare sunbeam penetrated. It was a small square on the floor, right by the barred window. There was a slight draft there, but the air also felt fresher than in the rest of the cell. Sara noticed that Lena often sat there when there was no communal work, looking out the window. One afternoon, when Lena and Martha had been taken away for interrogation or some work, Sara cautiously approached the window. A sunbeam fell on her face. She squatted down, closing her eyes, trying to imagine she was free, feeling the warmth of the sun. It lasted only a few minutes. Then, the creak of the door. Lena entered. She scanned the cell and stopped at Sara. Her face showed nothing. "Why are you sitting there?" Lena asked, her voice even, but with a hint of steel. Sara opened her eyes. "Just to warm up." "That's my spot," Lena said. She didn't come closer, just stood and watched. "There are no names here," Sara replied, her voice trembling, but she tried to make it sound firm. Inside, everything tightened. Fear, but also stubbornness. "There are," Lena cut her off. "Mine. Now get down." Sara hesitated for a moment. She wanted to apologize, to back down. It would have been easier. But then she imagined Emily's and Thomas's faces. They deserve a mother who can fight, not one who cries in a corner. She needed to stand up for herself, here and now. She slowly stood up. "I just sat for a bit. No harm done." Lena snorted but didn't move. "Everything matters here, new one. Every crumb, every spot. Remember that." She turned to her bunk, pulled her scrap of paper from behind the mattress. Sara saw her carefully smooth it before hiding it. It was that same faded photograph. A small girl. After that incident, Sara became more cautious, but also more determined. She began to notice other unwritten rules. Who washed the floor? Who got the last mug of tea? Who had the right to silence during lights out? She watched Lena. How she managed to get small concessions from the guards. How she quietly but firmly resolved minor disputes among other inmates. Lena wasn't a wise old woman dispensing advice. She was a survivor. And Sara understood that she needed to learn from people like Lena. Sara began to notice that the food was getting worse. Watery porridge with lumps was replaced by half-cooked vegetables. Portions decreased. The women in the cell began to grumble. "This isn't food, it's slop." One of them, Maggie, a young woman with tuberculosis who coughed constantly, muttered. "They're stealing again," Lena added, crossing her arms over her chest. "They don't care if we die or not." Tension grew. Every meal became a test. Hunger, cold, and constant anxiety accumulated. Sara felt a dull irritation building inside her. She was in prison, but that didn't mean they should starve them. The guards also became harsher, especially Petrov. His face was always grim, and his eyes, tired. He often spoke on the phone, stepping aside, and his voice was quiet, worried. Sara heard snippets of phrases. Mom, medication, no money. But that didn't stop him from being rough with the prisoners. One day, he threw a food tray at Martha because she was too slow taking her portion. The food spilled onto the floor. "Faster, pigs!" he barked, and his eyes flashed with anger for a moment. Martha just silently picked up the fallen crumbs. "We're all pigs to them here," Sara thought, "and they want us to know it." Sara tried not to stand out, to comply with all demands. She saw other women try to protest, but it only led to punishments: solitary confinement, loss of yard time, loss of packages. She couldn't afford such a luxury. She had to hold on. For her children. But sometimes even her own patience was at its limit. One day, during dinner, they were given completely spoiled potatoes. They were sour, with rot. A murmur went through the cell. "You can't eat this," one of the women said. "They've gotten completely brazen," another added. Lena silently sniffed her portion, then threw it on the floor. Let them eat their own shit. It was risky. The guards could punish the entire cell. But no one objected to Lena. Everyone was silent. Sara felt a wave of fury rise within herself. She also looked at her plate. The rotten smell hit her nose. This can't go on, Sara thought. It just can't. The next morning, in the dining hall, tension hung in the air. The women sat at the tables, barely speaking. When breakfast was brought, the same watery porridge, but now with an unpleasant burnt smell, Sara felt her stomach clench. She saw Lena looking at her portion, her lips tightly pressed. The other women's gazes were the same. Guards stood by the walls, their faces impassive. Among them was Petrov, his eyes constantly scanning the hall. Suddenly, one of the women sitting in the far corner cried out loudly, "How much longer are we going to be fed this crap?" Her voice was high-pitched, full of despair. It was like a trigger. Other women began to bang their mugs on the tables, first timidly, then louder and louder. The metallic clang filled the dining hall, drowning out the rare words. The noise grew. The guards became nervous, started talking on their radios, their eyes darting around. The dining hall walls, usually filled with monotonous murmuring, now vibrated with the rising hum of discontent. Sara watched this unfolding chaos, feeling a wave of fear rise within her. But at the same time, something else. Anger. This was their cry of despair. And she, Sara, felt the same. Petrov, seeing that the noise wasn't subsiding, rushed towards the protesting women. His face was crimson. "Shut up, all of you. Now!" he barked, his hand already reaching for the baton on his belt. But the women didn't stop. The noise grew, turning into a roar. Sara felt the entire hall vibrate with tension. Something was about to happen, and that something couldn't be good. This isn't just about food. Sara's mind raced. It's about everything that holds us down, about humiliation, about despair, about the fact that we're not people here. Petrov was clearly on edge. His eyes darted around. He looked tired and agitated. Perhaps another call from his mother, perhaps more problems with medication. But now all his anger was unleashed on the prisoners. He saw Lena, who was still sitting at the table, her gaze fixed on the plate of disgusting porridge. She wasn't banging, wasn't shouting, but her silence seemed more defiant than any scream. "What about you, old woman? Lost your mind completely?" Petrov lunged at Lena's table, his voice trembling with rage. He grabbed her plate and threw it to the floor. Rotten potatoes scattered across the tiles. Lena flinched, but didn't move, only raised her eyes to him. There was no fear in them, only deep, burned-out weariness. This, it seemed, enraged Petrov even more. He raised his hand to strike her, and Sara saw a flash in his eyes. Not just anger, but a kind of madness. He's going to hurt her badly. Sara's mind raced. He's lost control. And then Sara, without thinking what she was doing, jumped up from her seat. She was closer to Lena than the others. Adrenaline surged through her blood. The children. I can't be the kind of person who just watches someone get hit. She lunged forward, trying to intercept Petrov's arm. It was madness, pure suicide, but something inside her simply couldn't let it happen. Her mother had always said, "Never watch a weaker person get hit." "Don't touch her!" Sara cried out, her voice breaking into a rasp. She grabbed Petrov's sleeve, trying to pull him back. Her strength was negligible against his, but the surprise worked. Petrov was taken aback. He spun around sharply, his eyes narrowed. "What are you doing, bitch?" he roared, and his hand, which had been raised over Lena, now violently shoved Sara. Sara flew backward, hitting her shoulder on the edge of a table. Pain shot through her, but she immediately straightened up, refusing to fall. No, not now. Lena, who had been sitting like a stone all this time, now looked at Sara. A flicker of surprise crossed her eyes. "I said, don't touch her," Sara repeated, stepping between Petrov and Lena. She felt her knees tremble, but she couldn't back down. Emily's and Thomas's faces flashed before her eyes. They shouldn't think their mother is weak, that she gave up. Petrov swung again, this time at Sara. His fist flew towards her face. Sara instinctively raised her hands, trying to protect herself, but it was useless. At that moment, another guard rushed in from the side. He was younger than Petrov, apparently having just arrived. He grabbed Petrov by the shoulder. "Petrov, stop! What are you doing?" he shouted, trying to pull him away. Petrov was furious. He tried to break free, muttering something incoherent. His eyes were bloodshot. He saw neither Sara, nor Lena, nor even his colleague. He saw only his own despair. The other guards finally came to their senses. Whistles pierced the air. The women in the dining hall fell silent, frightened by the scene. The hum died down, replaced by frightened whispers. 2 guards subdued Petrov and dragged him aside. He continued to struggle, but they led him away. Silence hung in the dining hall. All eyes were fixed on Sara, who stood in the middle of the room, breathing heavily, her shoulder aching from the blow, her heart pounding wildly. Lena finally stood up. She approached Sara. Her face was impassive, but in her eyes, Sara saw something she hadn't seen before. Respect, or just surprise? "Are you crazy?" Lena asked softly, her voice low. "Why did you do that?" Sara just shook her head. She didn't know herself. She just couldn't stand and watch. He would have hit you," Sara replied, her voice hoarse. Lena was silent. She just nodded, then looked at the floor where the remnants of the porridge lay. "All right. Now everyone's going to pay for this." And she was right. The consequences were not long in coming. The prison warden, Colonel Smirnov, a man with a heavy, piercing gaze and a perpetually displeased expression, burst into the dining hall. He walked around the room, his eyes drilling into each inmate. "Who started this circus?" His voice was cold as ice. No one answered. Everyone was silent, eyes downcast. Sara felt the weight of their gazes on her. Smirnov stopped directly in front of the table where Sara and Lena sat. He looked first at Sara, then at Lena. He knew who was who here. "Sara Smith," he said, "and Lena Volkova. You two seem to be the bravest here, or the most foolish." Lena remained silent, her arms crossed over her chest. Sara also said nothing. What was there to say? "The instigators to solitary confinement," Smirnov ordered. "Everyone who banged will lose yard time for a week, and breakfast will be a dry ration." 2 guards approached Sara and Lena. "Out!" one of them barked. Sara and Lena were led out of the dining hall. The noise began to rise again behind them. Now it was not a riot, but a murmur of discontent. They were led down the corridors to solitary confinement. It was a small, cold room with no windows, with a single wooden platform. The smell of dampness and mold. "Well, thanks a lot," Lena grumbled as the door slammed shut behind them. "Now we're rotting in here because of you." Sara sat on the platform, leaning against the cold wall. "I'm sorry," she said. "Sorry," Lena mimicked. "What? Thought you were a hero? Heroes don't belong here. Survivors do." But there was no anger in her voice, only weariness. A day passed. Darkness, cold, food, a piece of stale bread and a mug of water. Sara lay curled up, trying to keep warm. Her shoulder ached. "What have I done?" she thought. "Now I'm in solitary. My children. Who will help them if I break down myself?" But then she remembered Petrov's gaze, his mad face, and Lena's look when she jumped up. I couldn't do otherwise. When they were released after 24 hours, the cell met them with silence, The women looked at Sara differently. Not with fear, not with contempt, with a strange kind of respect. Lena, entering the cell, immediately went to her spot by the window. She sat down, took out her faded photograph, and looked at it for a long time. Sara saw her out of the corner of her eye. "You didn't die in there?" Martha, who sat opposite, asked. "No," Lena replied without lifting her head. Conditions after the riot did indeed tighten. Yard time was reduced. Letters were scrutinized even more thoroughly. But something also changed inside the cell. Lena, though she didn't say it directly, began to treat Sara differently. She sometimes left Sara an extra piece of bread or shared hot water. Not with words, but with actions. She showed a certain acknowledgement. "Want me to teach you how to braid shoelaces from threads?" Lena asked one day, handing Sara a coil of unraveled cloth. "It'll come in handy. You need skills here. Otherwise, they'll devour you." Sara nodded. She learned to survive. A few days later, as Sara sat on her bunk, trying to fall asleep, Lena approached her. In her hand, she held a tiny, faded photograph. It was that same picture. "My daughter," Lena said softly. "Melissa. She died a long time ago. She was 3 years old." Sara looked at the photograph. A small girl with mischievous eyes. Sara's heart clenched. She understood that this photograph was all Lena had left, and the fact that Lena showed it to her meant a lot. "I have children too," Sara whispered. "Emily and Thomas. They're in an orphanage." Lena nodded. "I know. Everyone here knows. That's why I'm telling you. Hold on. For them." Soon, Sara was called to see her lawyer again. Mr. Davis sat at the table, adjusting his tie, still smelling of cheap coffee and tobacco. He looked even more tired than last time. "Sara," he began, spreading papers before him. "I've received permission. You can write a letter to your children." Sara's heart leaped. A letter. She could write to them. Something. "Thank you, Mr. Davis. Thank you so much." Sara could barely hold back tears. "Don't be too quick to rejoice," the lawyer said. "You can only send it through me, and the reply, if there is one, will also come to me. You understand? Censorship and all that." He handed her a sheet of paper and a stub of a pencil. "Write, but be careful. No details. Only about love, about remembering them, and no accusations." Sara nodded. She took the pencil, and her hand trembled. What to write? How to tell them that their mother, who was supposed to be their protector, was now behind bars? She wrote for a long time, erasing and rewriting words. She tried to convey her love, her longing, her hope. She wanted to explain that everything she did was for them. But the words seemed so empty, so absurd. Finally, she finished. The letter was short. She simply said that she loved them very much, that she missed them, and believed they would be strong. Mr. Davis carefully folded the letter. "I'll send it, and I'll wait for a reply." After that visit, Sara lived in anticipation. Every day, every hour, she thought about her children, about how they would receive her letter. She imagined their faces, their questions. Maybe they'll be happy. Maybe they'll remember me. A week passed. 2, 3. No news. Hope slowly faded, replaced by a returning despair. Maybe the letter never arrived. Maybe the children didn't understand it. And then, finally, Sara was called to see her lawyer again. Mr. Davis sat, as always, at the table, but this time his face was even grimmer than usual. In his hands, he held an envelope. "Sara," he said, his voice dull, "I received a reply from the orphanage director." Sara's heart froze. A reply, finally. Mr. Davis slowly opened the envelope. A folded sheet of paper fell out. He began to read. "Citizen Smith," the lawyer's voice was dry. "In response to your letter, I inform you that your children, Emily and Thomas Smith, are in our institution. They are healthy. However, due to their age and the circumstances of their separation, the children barely remember you." The lawyer's words were like hammer blows against glass. Barely remember. This was worse than if they hated her. It was emptiness. They had forgotten her. Sara felt the ground give way beneath her. All her struggle, all her pain, all her thoughts about her children, all shattered against one simple, cruel sentence. They didn't remember her. Her insides clenched with pain. She imagined them playing there, in the orphanage, laughing, eating their porridge, but without her, without their mother. And now she was a stranger to them. Just a name, perhaps not even a name, but a ghost from a past they didn't remember. Mr. Davis finished reading, then looked up at her. There was genuine sympathy in his eyes, which was rare. "I'm sorry, Sara. I know how hard this is." Sara didn't reply. She just stared into space, her eyes filling with tears. This was the most terrible sentence of all, a sentence of oblivion. She felt her insides twist into a tight, painful knot. Hatred, malice, resentment, all of that would have been easier to bear. But oblivion? It meant she was dead to them. I died, and they buried me. Without flowers, without tears. Sara's mind raced, a cold emptiness, as if she had been cut out of their lives with a clean, sharp knife. Mr. Davis cleared his throat, adjusting his tie. I have to go. Come if you need anything. I'll try to find something out." His words sounded like empty promises. He knew it himself. Sara was escorted back to her cell. Her steps were mechanical. Her body moved, but inside, everything was numb. She entered the cell without looking up. Lena sat on her bunk, watching. The other women, too. Everyone understood from her face. "Well?" Lena asked, her voice dull. "What did they say?" Sara just shook her head, unable to utter a single word. She climbed onto her top bunk, turning to face the wall. The walls were cold, as if they, too, didn't remember her warmth. They don't remember. They don't remember me. This thought, like a splinter, lodged in her brain. She was a mother who would have given everything for them, and that everything resulted in her simply being erased. After the riot, conditions did indeed tighten. Yard time was reduced to a minimum. Food became even worse. The guards were angry, tense, as if looking for any reason to lash out. But something also changed inside the cell. Lena, though she didn't say it directly, began to treat Sara differently. She no longer taunted her, no longer snorted. One day, when it was their turn to clean, Lena simply handed Sara a brush without saying a word. Before, she always gave instructions. Now their actions were coordinated, without unnecessary words. Sara felt this unspoken respect. She knew it wasn't sympathy or friendship. It was acknowledgement. Acknowledgement that Sara hadn't broken, that she was capable of fighting if needed. They don't remember me, but I still have to be strong. For them. So that, if ever, somewhere. The thought hung in the air. If I ever see them, they should see an unbroken mother. Days dragged on, turning into weeks. Sara worked in production, assembling some parts. Her hands ached, her back throbbed. The monotonous labor helped her not to think, but at night, the thoughts returned. She heard snippets of other women's conversations. Someone was waiting for a letter from her son. Someone hoped for a visit. Sara just remained silent. She had no one waiting for her, or whom she was waiting for. Only memories. Sometimes, in the silence of the cell, Lena would take out her faded photograph. She would stroke it with her thumb, her gaze becoming soft, almost tender. Sara watched her, understanding. "Have you been here long?" Sara asked one day, as they sat next to each other on the bunks. Lena looked up from the photograph. "Longer than I remember. 20 years it'll be." "What for? Don't ask." She looked at the picture again. Melissa would be grown up by now. Sara nodded. "My children, Emily and Thomas. They're currently in an orphanage." The words came with difficulty. "And they don't remember me." Lena looked at her, her eyes fathomless. "They'll forget, or pretend to. It doesn't matter. What matters is that you remember." She put the photograph away. "Hold on. Here, that's the only thing you have. Memory." These words, spoken by Lena, became Sara's anchor. If her children didn't remember her, then she had to remember for two. For herself and for them. She had to be their memory, their voice. Petrov, the guard, remained grim. Sara watched him. She saw him sometimes step aside, his shoulders hunching as he spoke on the phone. His voice grew quieter, more worried. His mother must be very ill, Sara thought. He's also a prisoner here, but of a different kind, a prisoner of circumstances and of his own anger. This didn't excuse his cruelty, but it helped her understand that he wasn't just absolute evil. He was a complex, broken man. One day, as they were being led out for yard time, Petrov walked past Sara, not looking her in the eye. He whispered, almost inaudibly, "Your lawyer came. Said they'd call you soon." Sara flinched. Mr. Davis. What else would he bring? More bad news? Or something that might change her situation, however slightly? She spent the next few days in tense anticipation. Every opening door, every call made her heart stop. Finally, the morning came when her name was called. "Smith, to the lawyer!" the guard shouted. Sara stood up. Lena nodded briefly at her, as if wishing her luck. In the visiting room, Mr. Davis sat at the table. He smelled, as always, of stale tobacco and cheap coffee. He looked even paler and more tired than usual, his tie askew. He didn't beat around the bush. "Sara, I have news. Possibly good. Possibly not. Depends on how you look at it." He adjusted his tie. "What happened?" Sara asked, her voice dry with anxiety. "I found a loophole," the lawyer said, placing several papers on the table. "Your case. There's an opportunity to file an appeal based on new circumstances." Sara's heart pounded. An appeal? This was a chance to change something. "What circumstances?" she asked, leaning forward. Mr. Davis sighed, releasing a puff of tobacco smell. "Your husband, John. In his case, there's testimony that, well, that can be interpreted as him having pressured you, admitted his full guilt, so to speak." Sara frowned. "He pressured me? He was just desperate." "It doesn't matter what actually happened, Sara," the lawyer interrupted her. "What matters is what can be proven in court. If you admit that he coerced you into this hijacking, that you were a victim of his influence and pressure, then your sentence could be significantly reduced. You could get out earlier." Sara froze. Reduced sentence. Get out earlier. See her children. But then she thought of John, broken John, the one who had already received 15 years. "And John?" she asked, feeling the words catch in her throat. "What will happen to him if I say that?" Mr. Davis looked away. His sentence could be increased for coercion, for organization. He would essentially take full responsibility, possibly additional years, maybe even 20 years. Sara leaned back in her chair, feeling a chill pierce her. 20 years. That was a life sentence for John. Her freedom at the cost of his life imprisonment. He's broken. He has no hope left. He accepted his sentence. Her mind raced. But me, my children need me. If I get out, I can help them. She looked at Mr. Davis. He waited for her decision, his gaze tired. This was her chance, her only chance to see her children before they completely forgot her face. But it meant crushing John completely. "Think about it, Sara," Mr. Davis said. "It's not an easy decision, but it's your only path to freedom, to your children." He didn't understand that she wouldn't return to her children. They didn't remember her. But she could fight for their future, for their freedom, even if that future was without John, even if it cost her a piece of her soul. Sara looked at the papers on the table. Freedom, and the price for it. She had to make a decision that would forever change their fates, all three of them. Or 4, if you counted her. Sara felt a lump rise in her throat. Breathing became difficult. Freedom. The word vibrated in the air, but it seemed so alien, so distant. And the price? John. Her John. However broken he was a father too. He's broken, Sara thought again. But I can't finish him off. I can't say he coerced me. It's a lie. He was just a desperate man, like me. She remembered that evening, before the hijacking, the feverish glint in John's eyes, his trembling hands. "Everything will be fine, Sara. This is our only chance." He believed it, believed he was saving them. Use his weakness now? Everything inside Sara protested. That's not me. That's not the mother I want to be for my children. "What do you think about it?" Mr. Davis asked, his voice pulling her from her stupor. He tapped his finger on the papers. "Time is limited. I need your consent." Sara looked up at him. "And what if I don't agree?" The lawyer slowly shook his head. "Then you serve your full sentence. 10 years. With no hope of reduction." He looked at her with a hint of pity. "And no chance of reunification with your children, at least until they're adults. 10 years. The number pressed down on her. 10 years, while Emily and Thomas grew up without her. 10 years, until they completely forgot her voice, her touch. They already didn't remember her. What would change in 10 years? Nothing. "And John?" Sara asked again. "What if I don't say he coerced me?" "Then he serves his 15, Mr. Davis replied, shrugging. "And you serve your 10. Everything stays as it is, just without a chance for you." Sara closed her eyes. A picture rose before her. Emily, clinging to a guard's uniform, Thomas trying to reach for John. They were so small, so defenseless. I fought for them. I committed a crime for them. And now I have to decide which of us will rot here longer. She opened her eyes. Mr. Davis waited patiently. He was just a messenger, bringing her this terrible choice. He wasn't evil. He was just an indifferent, tired man. "Can you give me a little time?" Sara asked, her voice barely audible. The lawyer nodded. "Tomorrow morning. I need an answer. Otherwise, I won't be able to file the appeal on time." Sara was returned to her cell. She felt as if she had been hit over the head. Every word from the lawyer echoed with pain. She climbed onto her bunk, turning to face the wall, just as she had the day she learned her children didn't remember her. Lena, sitting below, remained silent. She didn't ask. She just observed. Her silence was heavy, but somehow comforting. What to do? Pulsed in Sara's head. Freedom, children, John. What was more important? She imagined John in his maximum security facility, broken, with extinguished eyes. If she placed all the blame on him, it would be the end. He would never get out. They would break him completely. But if I don't get out, who will fight for the children? Who? She was their mother. She was supposed to be their protector. Sara remembered Lena's words. Heroes don't belong here. Survivors do. And also, hold on. Here, that's the only thing you have. Memory. Memory. That was the only thread connecting her to her children. And to John. If she abandoned John, it would be tantamount to erasing their shared memory, their shared attempt, their shared despair. That evening, the cell was noisy. Betty cried softly. Martha prayed quietly, fingering her rosary beads. Other women whispered about tomorrow's work. Sara lay still. I can't betray John. That's not the way. It would be too easy, too despicable. But if not John, then what? Another 10 years? She had seen women who had been here for 10, 15 years. They were like shadows, without hope, without a future. If I stay here, I'll become such a shadow too. And then I won't be able to help the children. Not at all. It was a vicious circle. She had to choose between two terrible options. At some point, Lena stood up and approached Sara. She handed her a mug of hot water. Here, it's hot. Sara took the mug. The warmth burned her fingers. Thank you, she whispered. Lena sat down next to her on the bottom bunk. She didn't look at Sara. Life. It's like that, Lena said softly. Sometimes you have to choose, but if others make the choice for you, that's not a choice. Sara looked at her. Lena didn't give advice, didn't lecture. She simply stated a fact Sara already knew herself. A choice, my choice. She began to think about her children, not whether they remembered her, but what they needed. They needed freedom. They needed a normal life. If she got out, even in a few years, she could fight. She could find them, help them. But at John's expense? This night was the longest of her life. She tossed and turned, closed her eyes, but sleep wouldn't come. Every thought was heavy, like a stone. She remembered John holding Emily in his arms as they walked towards the plane. His face was pale, but full of determination. He was doing it for them, for the children. And he broke when they were caught. His spirit was fragile. If I betray him, he won't survive it. The next morning, when the guard announced wake-up, Sara felt completely exhausted. But something inside her had changed. She had made a decision. A difficult, agonizing, but her own decision. She was called to the lawyer earlier than usual. Mr. Davis was already sitting at the table, his tie undone. He looked as if he hadn't slept all night either. Well, Sara, he asked, his voice tense, have you made a decision? Sara looked at him. Her eyes were red, but her gaze was firm. She felt strength returning to her. Not the kind of strength that throws a punch, but the kind that allows you to stand your ground. Yes, Sara replied. I have made a decision. She knew this decision would change everything, for her, for John, and for the children. And perhaps this decision wouldn't lead to her own freedom, but it would be the right one, the only right one for her. She took a deep breath. I will not blame John. Mr. Davis slowly lowered the folder to the table, making a dull, final thud. The rickety chair creaked. His tired eyes, hidden behind bags, fixed on Sarah's face, trying to find a hint of hesitation or even a glimmer of reason he could comprehend. The familiar, pervasive smell of cheap coffee and stale tobacco emanated from him, making Sara physically feel the weight of his weariness. Are you sure, Sara? He asked, his voice unusually quiet, almost a whisper. He seemed unable to believe his ears. This means we won't be able to file an appeal. No reduction in sentence. You will serve your full term, 10 years, possibly even more if there are any toughening measures. Sara nodded, feeling her throat tighten, but she held her chin high. There were no tears or fear in her eyes, only a resolve forged in fire. I am sure, Mr. Davis. This is my decision. I cannot break him any further. Her mind echoed through the empty corridors. John. He's already a ghost. His eyes were empty in court, as if his soul had left his body. If I say now that he coerced me, that I was merely a victim of his will, it will be his end. Not just a sentence, but the final shattering of his spirit, his humanity. He has already lost everything dear to him. I cannot be the reason he loses himself completely. Mr. Davis rubbed his temples, his tie completely askew, almost falling to the side, as if he himself was barely holding on. 10 years, Sara. That's not 1 or 2 years. That's a lifetime here. An eternity. Your children. They will grow up without you. They will forget you completely. Every memory of you will be erased, like a drawing in the sand under the rain. They are already growing up without me, Sara replied quietly but firmly. There was no break in her voice, just a bitter statement of fact, accepted by her as an axiom. And they barely remember me already, as you yourself told me. What will change, Mr. Davis, if I get out a couple of years earlier at the cost of his life imprisonment? Or even worse, at the cost of his complete destruction? He wouldn't survive such a blow. No, not his life, at the cost of his spirit. And that, as I've understood here, within these walls, is sometimes worse than death. In this prison, the soul dies before the body. I've seen it in the eyes of many women. I don't want John to become such a living dead soul who merely breathes but does not live. He was weak, yes, but not evil. He believed, and I believed him. This was our shared mistake, our shared price. But you could fight for them on the outside, the lawyer insisted, his voice a little louder, a note of professional disappointment, perhaps even bewilderment creeping in. Find them, establish contact, maybe take them from the orphanage, create some kind of life for them. Here, you are useless. What can you do from behind bars? I will fight from here, Sara said, and her voice, despite the internal pain and weariness, sounded firm, with a steel forged in these months of hell. I need my conscience, Mr. Davis, my humanity. I need to believe that I didn't betray the one I loved. They need a father who might someday return, one who wasn't completely broken. If I get out, leaving him to rot, that won't be freedom. That will be shame. And then I truly will be useless, even if I am free. Mr. Davis was silent. He looked at her with a long, scrutinizing gaze, and something appeared in his eyes that Sara hadn't seen before. Not just sympathy, but a deep human understanding that broke through his professional detachment. He, a man of the system, seemed for the first time in a long while to encounter something that didn't fit into his legal schemes, his cynical view of the world, something stronger than any law, any punishment, any gain, stronger than just the will to survive. "All right," the lawyer finally said, his voice now tired, but without the previous irritation. He closed the folder. The gesture was final, without right of appeal. "I will report this. There will be no appeal. You will serve your full sentence, 10 years, and perhaps this is not the end." He nodded, acknowledging her decision. He stood up, his movement slow, almost dejected. "I'm sorry, Sara. I did everything I could. Legally. My job was to find a loophole, but I can't force you to use it." Sara also stood. Her legs trembled slightly, but she held herself straight. "You did enough, Mr. Davis. More than I expected. Thank you." She understood that for him, this was a failure, a loss of potential success, and perhaps a fee. But for her, it was the only possible path to preserving herself, her dignity, freedom. What is this freedom? Freedom from walls, but imprisoned by your own conscience, knowing you finished off the person you once loved? Or to be locked up, but to know you didn't betray, that you preserved your honor, your truth? This was the question that tormented her all night, and now she knew the answer. True freedom isn't outside, it's within. She looked at the door, behind which a guard waited. For the first time in a long while, she felt no fear of what lay beyond that door. Cold walls, harsh words, monotonous days. All of it was there. But now she walked towards it with a different feeling, a feeling of a heavy but right sacrifice. She had made her choice, and now she had to live with it. The guard, young and sullen, escorted her back. He didn't look at her, just pushed her forward through the long, echoing, foul-smelling corridors. Sara walked calmly, her steps steady, not trembling as they had on the first day she entered the pre-trial detention center. When the iron cell door clanged open, she stepped inside. All eyes turned to her as soon as she crossed the threshold. The women waited. Would they see despair, defeat in her eyes, as was usual after such meetings with a lawyer? Lena sat on her bunk, cleaning a fingernail with a scrap of paper, but her eyes were fixed on Sara. She looked up at Sara. There were no questions in her gaze, only a deep, silent understanding. Lena had seen much, and she seemed to read people like an open book, having long unlearned to ask unnecessary questions. "What, Sara?" asked Betty, a young, nervous girl whose eyes were always red from tears and whose hands constantly fidgeted with the edge of her blanket. "What did the lawyer say? Are you getting out?" Sara shook her head. "No, I'm not getting out." Her voice was even, without a single tremor, as if she was simply stating a fact. A thick, heavy silence hung in the cell. The women exchanged quick glances. No one expected such an answer after a lawyer's visit, which could have brought some hope for early release. Usually, after such news, they either cried or got angry. Sara was calm. "So, you'll rot here, like everyone else?" Martha, a large, silent woman, said quietly, fingering her rosary beads. There was no judgment or malice in her voice, just a statement of the harsh, unchanging reality they all knew well. Sara walked to her top bunk. She climbed up, pressing herself against the cold, rough wall, covered with strangers' names and dates, symbols of long-lost hopes. But the cold was no longer as piercing, as all-consuming as before. Inside her burned a small, stubborn flame that neither walls, nor years, nor oblivion could extinguish. They don't remember me, my little Emily and Thomas. Their faces, their laughter, now just images in my memory, not in theirs. But I remember them, and I will remember them for both of us. She closed her eyes, and before her inner vision appeared their faces, not faded like an old photograph, but alive, bright, full of childlike spontaneity. Their laughter, their small hands, their hugs. These memories were her treasure, her only possession that no one could take away. I must be strong, not for myself, not for personal selfish freedom, for them, so that if someday, after long years, they ask who their mother was, they won't be ashamed. So that their father, John, can someday return to them, not completely broken, not crushed by my lie, so that they have at least someone left. Sara opened her eyes. The cell was the same as always, cramped, stuffy, full of the smells of sweat and fear, drafts and creaking bunks. But now she looked at it differently. This was her world, her choice, her path, for the next 10 years, or perhaps longer. But this path was paved by her own decision. She began to think about what lay ahead, about monotonous work in production, about fighting for every extra piece of bread, for a drop of clean air, about how to maintain her sanity in this madness, not to turn into a shadow. This would be her new, long battle, a battle for herself. I will write them letters, not so they receive or read them, not to bring back their memory, but to remember them myself, to maintain my connection with them, even if one-sided, even through this wall of oblivion. She would write about the weather, about butterflies, about what she saw from the tiny window of her cell if she was lucky, about how much she loved them, every day, with every breath. She looked at Lena. She sat curled up, gently stroking her faded photograph, her lips barely moving, as if she was whispering something. Little Melissa. Lena remembered too, and her memory was her strength, their shared strength. Lena, Sara called softly, almost inaudibly, her voice echoing in the silence of the cell. Lena looked up, her perceptive, tired eyes meeting Sara's. Something more than mere curiosity was in them. What? Teach me how to braid these shoelaces. I need something to occupy my hands and my mind, so I don't go crazy. Lena nodded. A fleeting, barely perceptible smile crossed her face. All right, come tonight. I'll show you. It'll come in handy. You need skills here. Otherwise, they'll devour you. There was no irony in her voice, only practicality and a certain, barely discernible respect. It was an acknowledgement. Not friendship in the usual sense, but the acknowledgement of one survivor by another. An acknowledgement of strength that hadn't broken. Sara knew her fight wasn't over. It had only just begun, but on a completely different level. This was a fight for meaning, for hope, for a future she might never see, but for which she was willing to pay the full price, for the right to be human. Freedom isn't just walking out from behind bars, leaving the ruins of someone else's fate behind, Sara thought, feeling the warmth of a sunbeam on her hand, which had miraculously pierced through the bars. Freedom isn't selling yourself, not breaking your soul. Even here, especially here, it's preserving what makes you you. A mother, a wife, a human being. Even if you pay for it with your time, your body, your years. She clenched her fist, feeling that tiny, but real warmth. This was her life, her choice, and her hope, which, like a stubborn sprout, pushed through the thick prison earth. And in this choice, in this hope, she found her own, true freedom, which did not depend on barbed wire and high walls. It was a bitter, difficult path, but it was hers, and it led to a future in which, perhaps, her children would be free from her mistakes